Vivid verses.
I started tracking the data 24 months ago. I kept a ledger, not a diary, a ledger. Column A, capital injected. Column B, intimacy, frequency, and duration. Column C, the interval before the next crisis. The correlation was absolute. It was mathematically precise. I would wire $50,000 for inventory expansion or emergency vendor payments, and the temperature in the house would rise immediately. She would be present. She would be tactile. We would have 3, maybe 4 days where she acted like the woman I married. She would ask about my firm. She would touch the back of my neck when I read in the study. Then, the inevitable regression to the mean. A shipment would be delayed, a client would critique a design, or she would simply feel overwhelmed. The physical barrier would go back up. The affection became a metric of her stress levels, and her stress levels were directly tied to her solvency. It wasn't a marriage. It was a subscription service with a terrible churn rate. I was paying a premium for a service that was only delivered during the promotional window. To understand the termination of the contract, you have to look at the terms we've been operating under. When Xylia launched the Obsidian collection, the premise was solid enough. High-end curation, imported textiles, bespoke interior design. I respected the ambition. I respect anyone who attempts to build equity. I wrote the seed check, $200,000, and I categorized it as an angel investment in my partner. I wanted her to have skin in the game, but the dynamic shifted 6 months in. The business stopped being a pursuit of profit and started being a pursuit of status, subsidized by my revenue. The Obsidian collection became a black hole. She wasn't selling design. She was buying an identity as a businesswoman, using my capital. The retail space she insisted on, downtown, Italian marble floors, custom lighting, burned 5 figures a month in overhead before she sold a single throw pillow. Last Tuesday was the end of the fiscal quarter. I knew the play before she even parked her car. I have remote administrator access to the Obsidian QuickBooks. I don't check it to spy. I check it because my name is on the guarantor documents for the commercial lease. She was in the red. Deeply. The lease on that retail space was up for renewal in 48 hours. She needed liquidity, and she needed it immediately. I was sitting in the library. High-backed leather chair. No screens, just a notepad where I had already calculated the quarter's losses. She entered the room, and I didn't look up. I didn't need to see her to know the strategy. I've cataloged the choreography of her manipulation for years. It's a flowchart. If I am passive, she attacks. If I am aggressive, she cries. If I am neutral, she seduces. She bypassed the guest chair. The guest chair implies a formal meeting, a separation of interests. Instead, she crossed the room and leaned against the edge of my desk. It's a proximity tactic. It invades my personal space, forcing a physical awareness of her. She was wearing that silk dress she knows I like, the teal one. The posture was a calculated blend of vulnerability and invitation. Shoulders slumped just enough to suggest weight, hips angled just enough to suggest availability. She started with the softener. Zoltan, she said. Her voice had that specific modulation, breathless, slightly lower pitch, that she uses when she's about to ask for a wire transfer. The expansion for the Obsidian collection is at a tipping point. I've calculated that another 50,000 would secure the lease for the next year. She paused. That was the hook. Then came the bait. I know I've been unavailable lately, she said, trailing a finger along the mahogany edge of the desk. But once this lease is signed, the weight will be off my shoulders. I want us to get back to how we were in the beginning. I want you again. Sit with that phrasing. I want you again. She wasn't offering desire. She was offering the possibility of desire, contingent on a $50,000 buy-in. She was negotiating a futures contract on her own affection. She was telling me that her love was locked behind a paywall, and the subscription fee was the lease on a failing store. I looked at her. I checked my own vitals. Pulse 60. Respiration normal. There was no anger. Anger implies surprise, and I wasn't surprised. I was just verifying the pattern. I didn't see a wife offering a breakthrough. I saw a vendor offering a contract renewal with unfavorable terms. "You're presenting a conditional trade, Xylia," I said. I kept the tone flat. No volume. Volume signals loss of control. If you yell, you lose the frame. You're suggesting that your desire is a commodity that can be purchased through a commercial lease. I've observed this cycle. The last 3 times I funded a milestone, we had exactly 4 days of closeness before a new stressor was introduced to reset the barrier. That is not a marriage. It is a subscription service. This is the moment where the amateur crumbles. The amateur hears the accusation and backs down because they don't want to be mean. They want to keep the peace. But I wasn't interested in peace. I was interested in the audit. Her reaction was textbook. First, the micro-expression of shock. Not that I was refusing, but that I had decoded the cipher. She realized the transaction was visible to me. Then, the pivot to victimhood. She widened her eyes. She put a hand to her chest. She shifted the reality of the conversation, the gaslight. "How can you be so cold?" she asked. "It's not a trade. I'm suffering. I'm stressed. You're twisting my words to make me look like a villain because you're frustrated." Darvo. Deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. She wanted me to defend my tone, so we stopped talking about the money. She wanted me to apologize for hurting her, so she could graciously accept the check as a peace offering. She was trying to make my boundaries the problem, rather than her behavior. I didn't flinch. I remained in the frame. I refused to let her emotional volatility dictate the pace of the negotiation. "I'm not frustrated, and I don't believe you are a villain," I told her. "I'm simply looking at the data of our last 24 months. Facts aren't cold. They are just true. To protect the clarity of our relationship, I've closed the boutique's line of credit and canceled the luxury card. I'm removing the financial element from our intimacy entirely." You could see the physical impact. It hit her like a kinetic strike. She actually recoiled. The realization hit her that this wasn't a negotiation. It was a notification of policy change. The leverage she thought she held, her presence, her body, her mood, had just been devalued to zero. "You've destroyed my business," she shouted. The modulation of her voice changed. She was loud enough now that the staff in the hallway would hear. "That's a leverage play, creating a social cost for my refusal. If you do this, there's no us. I can't be with someone who treats me like a line item. You'll regret this when I'm gone." It was a threat of abandonment. In her mind, her presence was the asset and my money was the liquidity provided to maintain it. She was threatening to pull the asset. She expected me to panic. She expected me to scramble to fix it. "I accept that consequence," I said. I didn't stand up. I didn't lean forward. I stayed rooted in the chair. "If the only way you can be with me is by being subsidized, then we don't actually have a relationship to save. I'm not doing this to you. I'm stopping something I am doing for you." She broke then, not into tears, into rage. The mask slipped. The stressed wife vanished, and the disgruntled counterparty appeared. She realized the gaslighting hadn't worked, so she went for the nuclear option. She reached for the weapon she thought would end the argument by making the cost of refusal too high. "Fine," she spat. Her face was hard now, ugly with calculation. "You want to be logical? Let's talk about the math of a divorce. I'll take half of this estate, the holdings in the valley, and 5 years of alimony. You'll pay 10 times that lease just to get me out of your sight." She thought she had the leverage. She thought the state statutes were on her side. She forgot who she married. She forgot that I don't enter contracts without exit strategies. She forgot that I read the fine print. This was the moment of the shift. I didn't show anger. I didn't show triumph. Triumph is emotional. I needed to be surgical. I reached into the side drawer. I took out the document. It was a single, notarized sheet. I didn't slide it aggressively. I placed it precisely on the mahogany, aligned with the edge of the blotter. The Ethelgard pre-nup, section 4.2, I said calmly. She froze. She remembered the name. We signed it 5 years ago, in the whirlwind of the engagement. She hadn't read it since. She assumed it was standard boilerplate, that if we split, she'd get a payout proportional to my net worth. She assumed I was too in love back then to protect myself. She was wrong. It stipulates that in the event of a filing, assets acquired prior to the marriage, which includes this estate and the holdings, remain separate, I explained. It also states that for a marriage lasting less than 7 years, your exit compensation is a flat $75,000. No alimony, no equity. I watched her process the number. $75,000. That covers her boutique's lease for a year and leaves her with enough for a deposit on a rental apartment. That's it. 5 years of overhead, 0 equity built. I stood up then, not to intimidate, but to conclude. The meeting was over. I've already had the document verified by counsel this morning. The funds are in an escrow account. I'm not choosing to lose you, Xylia. I'm choosing to stop participating in a transaction where I'm the only one paying. My driver is available to take you to the boutique to gather your personal things. The power shift was absolute. Xylia looked at the man she thought she could bend with a smile or a cold shoulder, and realized he was a fortress she had never actually breached. She wasn't dealing with a husband anymore. She was dealing with a landlord who had just evicted a non-paying tenant. She didn't scream. She didn't throw anything. The air just went out of the room. She looked at the paper, then at me. She realized there was no appeal process. She left 20 minutes later. I had the staff box her personal effects, clothes, jewelry, the things she brought into the marriage. I didn't watch her go. I sat in the library and listened to the front door close. That was 4 days ago. The silence that followed wasn't the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of efficiency. But the work wasn't done. The eviction was just the beginning of the logistics. For the first 48 hours, I stayed on the grounds. I needed to oversee the transition. The household staff needed to see that the rhythm of the estate remained unbroken. If the captain panics, the crew mutinies. If the captain stays at the helm and checks the charts, the crew makes the coffee and sweeps the floors. I called a meeting with the house manager, Mrs. Gable, the following morning. I didn't offer a sob story. I didn't explain the emotional nuances. I gave her the logistical updates. Xylia will not be returning. I told her. Her access codes are to be deactivated immediately. Any deliveries addressed to her or the Obsidian collection are to be refused. We are reverting to the single occupancy budget for the kitchen. Please have the West Wing guest suites prepped for potential future use, but otherwise, close them down. Mrs. Gable is a professional. She didn't ask why. She wrote it down in her notebook, nodded, and asked if I wanted dinner at the usual time. That is the value of paid loyalty over conditional affection. It's transactional, yes, but the terms are clear and the deliverables are consistent. The hardest part wasn't missing her. It was the phantom limb syndrome of the stress. I caught myself checking my phone for the crisis text at 2 p.m. It never came. I found myself bracing for the evening negotiation about why she couldn't attend the charity board meeting. It never happened. The energy I used to spend managing her instability was suddenly returned to me. I redirected it. I spent the last 2 days auditing the rest of my portfolio. It turns out, when you aren't bleeding mental bandwidth trying to solve a puzzle that has no solution, you become incredibly effective at spotting inefficiencies elsewhere. I sold the shipping logistics stake in Hamburg. I've been holding it for sentiment. I realize sentiment is a luxury I don't need in my portfolio any more than I need in my bedroom. Then came the social fallout. I knew it would. Xylia is a master of the narrative. She doesn't have capital, but she has social currency. My phone started blowing up on Thursday. Calls from the concerned wives of my business partners. Texts from the golf buddies who had heard a distorted version of events. "I heard you threw her out on the street," one text read. "Is it true you cut off her health insurance?" another asked. She was spinning the story. She was painting a picture of a tyrant and a refugee. It was a smart play. If she could shame me socially, she might think she could force a settlement outside the pre-nup. A reputation tax. I didn't respond. I didn't issue a statement. In a crisis, information is ammunition. If you fire back, you validate the attack. If you stay silent, the attack hits a void. Instead, I went to the club on Friday night. I sat at my usual table. I ordered my usual meal. I didn't look like a man in crisis. I didn't look like a tyrant. I looked like a man eating a steak. A few people approached. They were fishing. "Zoltan, we haven't seen Xylia. She's pursuing some independent opportunities," I said. "We've decided to restructure the partnership." Restructure the partnership. I watched them digest that. It's corporate language. It strips the emotion out of it. It implies that the decision was mutual, logical, and business-focused. It gives them nothing to gossip about except my coldness, and my coldness is a known quantity. They can't pity her if I don't look like a villain, just a pragmatist. By Saturday, the tone of the messages changed. The White Knights realized I wasn't going to engage, and Xylia's story started to show cracks. You can only claim to be destitute while posting from a suite at the Four Seasons for so long before the cognitive dissonance sets in for the audience. She tried to contact me yesterday. Not directly. She knows better than to violate the no-contact directive from the lawyers. She sent a proxy. Her brother, Elias. Elias showed up at the gate around noon. I watched him on the perimeter security monitor. He looked agitated. He's a young man, driven by emotion, lacking the discipline to understand the long game. He was pacing back and forth in front of the intercom, working himself up. I buzzed him in. I didn't invite him into the house. The house is a sanctuary. The porch is a boundary. I met him on the steps. I kept my hands in my pockets. "You can't do this to her," he said. He was shaking. "She gave you 2 years of her life. And I gave her 2 years of shelter, capital, and connections," I replied. The exchange was equitable until it wasn't. Now the contract is concluded. "It's not a contract, it's a marriage," he shouted. He stepped forward, invading my space. He wanted me to flinch. He wanted a physical confrontation because he understands violence, but he doesn't understand leverage. "A marriage is a contract," I corrected him. "It is a legal binding of assets and liabilities. The romantic element is a variable, not the foundation. When the liabilities exceed the assets for 8 consecutive quarters, you liquidate. That is what I have done." He looked at me with genuine horror. He called me a sociopath. I didn't take offense. To a man who rules his life by his shifting emotional states, consistency looks like madness. To a man drowning in chaos, a lifeboat looks like a prison ship. I handed him an envelope I had prepared. "This is the schedule for the movers to collect the furniture she requested. It is not the furniture from the house, which belongs to the estate. It is the furniture she purchased for the boutique using the joint account. I am releasing it to her. It is a gesture of goodwill." He took the envelope. He didn't know what to say. He expected a fight, and I gave him a logistics sheet. He left confused. That is the goal. Confusion delays reaction. You have to understand the level of insulation I've built around this exit. It wasn't just the prenup. It was the separation of operational structures. Yesterday afternoon, I received a call from the property management firm that owns the building Obsidian occupies. They were panicked. Xylia had obviously tried to gain access to the space, but without the lease renewal funds, they were locking her out. They called me because I was the guarantor. Mr. Zoltan, the manager, said, "We have a situation. Xylia is here demanding we open the doors, but the rent is outstanding and the lease has lapsed. She says you're wiring the funds." I put the phone on speaker and set it on the desk. "I'm not wiring the funds," I said clearly. "My guarantee expired with the lease term on the 15th. Any access you grant her is at your own risk. The entity Obsidian Collection is insolvent. I advise you to mitigate your losses." "But she's screaming," the manager said. "That is a noise complaint, not a financial strategy," I replied. "Call security." I hung up. It wasn't cruel. It was necessary. If I had intervened, I would have re-established liability. By letting the natural consequences of her business model play out, I forced her to face the reality she had been avoiding for 2 years. She isn't a victim of my divorce. She is a casualty of her own balance sheet. I spent the rest of Sunday morning dealing with the final loose thread, the lawyers. My counsel, Vance, is a shark, but he charges by the hour, so I keep him on a short leash. We met at his office, not my home. I don't bring contamination back to the source. Vance had the initial filing from Xylia's representation. They were trying a duress angle on the pre-nup. They claimed she was under emotional distress when she signed it 5 years ago. "It's a standard probe," Vance said, tossing the brief onto the table. "They want to see if we'll settle to avoid the headache. They're asking for $500,000 to go away quietly." I looked at the brief. It was filled with adjectives: distraught, overwhelmed, coerced. "No settlements," I said. "We stick to the document. Section 4.2, $75,000. If they pursue the duress claim, we countersue for the unauthorized use of the joint credit line for business expenses, which is a violation of the marital asset clause in Section 6. We audit every purse, every fixture, every flight." Vance smiled. "He likes it when I play hardball. That will drag it out." "Let drag," I said. "I have a capital to wait. She needs the cash flow now. She will fold within the month. And she will. I know her burn rate. The house is quiet now. I'm looking at the Valley holdings. The acquisition I put on hold 6 months ago because Xylia wanted a vacation in the Maldives. I'm triggering the buy clause tomorrow morning. I have the liquidity now. I have the focus. People ask me if I'm lonely. They project their own fear of silence onto me. They don't understand that for a man who values order, silence isn't emptiness. It's potential. It's a blank canvas. I'm not lonely. I'm operational. I've analyzed the regret variable too. Regret is the recognition of an error in calculation. I look at the data. I look at the bank accounts stabilized. I look at my blood pressure down 10 points. I look at the time I have available for actual work doubled. There is no error in calculation. Therefore, there is no regret. Xylia will be fine. She is resourceful in her own way. She will find another investor. There is always a market for what she is selling, provided the buyer doesn't read the prospectus too closely. But I'm out of that market. I have permanently retired from the speculation of high volatility partners. I'm converting the boutique's office space down the hall into a humidor. It seems a more appropriate use of the square footage. It stores assets that appreciate with time, rather than liabilities that depreciate the moment you sign the receipt.
Thanks for listening.